like Oracle. So one of the features that was missing was that if you made a query to the database, and I mean, you don't know before you query, just do select star from users. If you have 1 million users in the database is going to return 1 million rows. And if you're only going to show 10, you're sitting there waiting for 1 million rows to be transferred across the TCP socket. And that takes forever. And if you're only going to use 10, it's kind of silly. Yes, you should have been smarter at the beginning and not done a select star, but often you don't know, or at least the people writing the templates, they do stupid things. So I added a limit clause, so that you can do select star from whatever, limit 10. I know I'm never going to use the first 10, so just tell the database, even if there are 1 million rows that match this select, just give me the first 10 that you find. So I added that to mini-SQL, and that since has been picked up by MySQL and Postgres, and I think Sybase has it now. A number of databases have picked up on that as well. But that was one of these pieces that I found was missing when you're writing web apps. And so my point here is that I didn't focus that much on PHP, the templating part of PHP. My focus was on the back-end logic and on the ecosystem of making sure all the pieces fit really nicely together. So I looked a lot at performance and security as well. For example, there are features for ISPs such as memory limits and CPU limits, so that the ISP could say, if any one particular user uses more than 10 megs of memory for the request, kill off the request, right? Or if they use more than this many CPU seconds, kill the script. Because people could write an infinite loop and really eat up all the CPU on the ISP, and the ISP liked the fact that they could limit people. Other technologies came along a bit later. Mod Perl, for example, was also a way of embedding a language into the Apache web server. They got it completely wrong because they gave people really low-level access into Apache. You could make some amazing things with Mod Perl, but an ISP could never offer Mod Perl to customers without providing a completely separate Apache instance for each user, because Mod Perl could change everything about the Apache server, including how virtual hosts were handled. So one user could take the request for every other virtual host, for example, on that particular Apache instance. So it wasn't an ISP solution, which is why it never really took off. I mean, it was used, it's still used today, here and there, but nowhere near the numbers that PHP was. And that was an example of good technology, but missing on the ecosystem, missing building an actual useful, realistic solution for people, which is where PHP has always been ahead of everybody else in terms of a pragmatic solution that just works. And that's where my focus was. So, part of that is also making sure that we can scale. We can make sure that once you get started, hey, I found a place to host it, I'm starting to write my code, this seems pretty easy, everything's just working. Now I need to grow and I get bigger. And part of that scaling in PHP is that in order to scale, you basically have to just remove all the things that don't scale, which is kind of what I did. I just made sure I didn't do anything that didn't scale. Right? It's not that PHP scales super well, it's that there's nothing in PHP that doesn't scale. So all the pieces that wouldn't scale, I just didn't do. So a shared data store, any sort of application server, for example. If you're doing Java development, you might store things in the JVM so that all the Java threads can access this one shared data store in the JVM, which is great if you're on one server. But as soon as you have two servers, now you have this JVM data store where if the first request comes in here, and then the load balancer sets the next request over here, suddenly your shared data is sitting on one server and you need it on the second server. Now you need to start replicating your data store from one JVM instance to another. And that gets hard, that gets complicated. And so I said, I'm just not going to do that. If you want a shared data store, go find one. Buy Oracle, get a database, use Memcache, whatever. Memcache didn't exist back then, but still. This was one of these, this is not my problem. So All of those things that stop technologies from scaling aren't in PHP. So PHP scales perfectly. Not because I was brilliant, but because I was lazy and I avoided doing anything that had a scaling issue. And it comes down to this shared nothing architecture, basically, that every PHP request is unique and distinct. A request comes in, I build everything up that I need, you serve the request, then I tear everything down. So there's nothing left over. There's no sign of that request on the very next request, which means that it doesn't matter if one request comes in on this server, the next request comes in on that server, and the third request comes in on the third server. As far as speed is concerned, it doesn't matter. So you can scale horizontally forever. And you can just put lots and lots of servers next to each other. If you need more capacity, add more servers. Add more data centers, whatever. Right? So in terms of scaling, PHP didn't have a problem. So scaling up is not an issue. The thing I concentrated a bit more on, actually, was scaling down. And scaling down is not natural to geeks, guys like me. I mean, engineers, we think about making things go faster, making things more efficient, making it use less memory, make it bigger, basically. That's kind of a natural thing. But how do you go the other way? How do you scale down? And by scaling down, I don't mean make it go slower, make it use more memory. I mean, when you're scaling up, you're trying to address users that need lots and lots of requests, thousands of requests a second, and lots of servers. What about the guy who only has 5 requests per day? Right? What does he need? He doesn't do this stuff very often. He just plays a little bit with this stuff on weekends. He's not a professional web developer at all. He just has a good idea, or he wants to put his family photos online. Is this technology accessible to him? And many, many environments out there are saying, I don't care about that user. This is not an interesting user. I'm interested in stuff that needs to go fast. I'm interested in the high end. I'm not interested in the low end. And that's where PHP has really sort of pushed down into the low end. That people with good ideas, they need a technology to allow them to put their good ideas online. I mean, imagine what the web would look like if only computer science graduates were allowed to put content on the web and actually build applications for the web. The web would be terrible. Geeks like me are pretty boring, right? We don't have a lot of interesting things to give the world. There's tons of people out there that don't know anything about technology that have really interesting things to say. And I think that's one of the things PHP has provided. It's provided a way for people with very little experience to actually build interesting things and put it online. And yes, a lot of it's terrible. The implementation is terrible. But you know how many startups have started with terrible implementation, where the first version was absolutely horrible, but the idea was good. And then as the idea catches on, this little startup grows and grows and grows, and they hire a few geeks like you guys, right, to make the implementation better. So you iterate, you make a second version, a third version, it gets better and better, the company keeps growing, hire more geeks, smarter geeks, the code gets even better. But without that initial seed, without that guy with an idea who was able to just barely build something that kind of worked, the startup wouldn't have happened. So it's really important to push all the way down into the low end, I think. And at the same time, it can't be a product that only serves the low end, that can only take you so far. Visual Basic might be an example of that, right? You can't really build Yahoo or Facebook in Visual Basic. It's not going to work. That pushes down into the low end, but it only takes you so far. So I think the rocket science behind PHP is that we push really down into the low end, but it also stretches really, really high into the high end, where you can start. You can be a weekend warrior just barely knowing what you're doing, and you can take it all the way up to a Facebook. All